Alright, here we go. CIS-125, 11/7/16. We are on week 11? Crazy. Okay, so we started out, the students worked on the assignments the first half hour, asked their team questions or work individually, and then we got started around 8:30 in the class talking about questions and so forth people might have on assignments. Then I did a little bit of work on reviewing arrays and lists, talked a little bit about tuples, but we didn't do any specific examples. In that harvest yield, there's one that has a 1, and then the area 2, and then the yield, area 3, and the yield, and asked a bunch of questions. You really can just focus on the yields. But what I told the students, if they could tie these together, that'd be a great example to do in class, maybe even some extra points for that. Alright, then I went into functions. We defined functions and we led into modules. And then they had time to work on questions. We didn't actually use all that time. So, we defined functions, which eventually then we're going to refer to, you can use these as modules. It's very easy to do, but there's a few important concepts you have to realize. You can go define the function, and give the function a name, similar to a variable name, and then you have this parameter here that is what you can pass a value to that. Got to have a colon, and then everything's indented in the function. We have a return. Here we can use any of the structures that we've used before. Any of the structures. You can use a while, you can use leading decision, trailing decision, you can use a sequence, maybe that's obvious, you can do a conditional, an if-then, and so forth. So this becomes, we can use the term as a function, or we can think of that whole thing as a module. Alright, we're going to show you an example where we use one here in a little bit. So then you can define that in your program, and then you can start your regular code. Okay, then somewhere in your program, you have here maybe some variable here, and then you have the name of the function, and then whatever value you have here, that gets passed to the value here. And it could be more than one. And 3, and then 3 up there. 3 values up there. Okay? So it passes that. Okay? So we take this value, it gets passed up to here. It does the work, and then it returns the value. Okay? So it does this work, and then returns the value to here. Way cool how it works. And let's move on, okay? I keep my very many slides. A couple key things. One thing is the variable scope. If you declare a variable in the function, it's local. If in the function or module you run into a variable that's not declared in there, you're just going to use one. If that variable exists globally, it'll use it as a global variable. On Wednesday, we will specifically indicate in our modules or functions if we want a variable to be global in there. Okay? The computer science circles, if you haven't gotten that far to where they talk about functions, defining functions, they do a really good job of taking through this whole thing step by step in terms of coding. In terms of design, this is a big deal. You can design a main program, and then within that program you can call these modules at any time. And what's really cool is these modules eventually could be written by anybody. You could write a really cool module and distribute it to everybody. So your design here can be pretty straightforward, and then when you need to do a particular thing, you call the module, then it sends back what you need. So we'll start working on Wednesday. We'll talk about the main line and then modules. In the old days, they'd call it a main line and subroutines. And in the old days, I mean, like forever ago, in the 70s and 80s. Okay, where have we seen this already? Or some students may have done this already. They may have imported math, and so that's importing all the modules that, or all the functions that go with math, and then you can use that in your program by going math dot and the name of the function, and then what you're going to execute the information on, what you're going to do. Okay? And we'll start looking at those. And eventually we'll find out that you can import your own modules into the code. So here we have a program, and I have omitted, okay, a lot of the documentation. Python 3, got our interpreter, module example. So then right here we created a module. I created a module to calculate FICA, and I just arbitrarily picked 0.08%. Okay, so here's the define, got a colon, here's the name of the function, okay, and here's the parameter. So we're going to pass some information to the parameter. Okay, all right. So then here we start the program. So I got count, total, gross, total, and we input the hours greater than 40, and we do the calculation here. And this is a nice example of an if-then, how you might use it for overtime, at least how I did it. And I know students did it a number of ways. If it's not over 40, if it's 40 or less, we calculate the pay, okay? And then I came here and I printed the gross pay, and then for the FICA, I called this function. So it took the value here, what's stored in gross, okay, took that, and it literally put it here, did this calculations, and then it returned this value, calculated this value, and then that value returned. So that value from here then went into FICA. That's how it works. These variables up here are local. They have no effect on the main line or the main program. They're local. They only hold values in the function. So those won't get mixed up with some other variables you might be using. It's very simple to call the function, very simple to send a value to the function, and then it calculates and brings that value back. And then the rest of the program goes on and loops up and so forth. All right, well, that's an introduction to those, and we'll look at some examples on Wednesday to where, what would we do if we left this code sitting somewhere else and then just called it. I did mention that again. Remember when we have our source code, and then oh, here, let me back up. Okay. We talked about setting that out aside somewhere. Okay. So remember we had our source code, and then we either compiled or interpreted to an object, and then we had to link that object to get an executable. That's where we can bring in these extra things. And it all happens when the interpreter goes through your code the first run to make sure everything is okay. Alright, we'll talk more about that later. Done.